Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show.
Our next guest has a first-class Master of Physics and a PhD in particle physics from Hertford College at the University of Oxford. And until 2012, she was a research fellow at St. John's College, Oxford. Now, for years, she worked at the German Electron Synchrotron Accelerator DESI, based in Hamburg, and at the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Geneva, before becoming interested in the physics of complex human systems. Bright woman. Now, I came across her today. She mentioned our show in a tweet that she put out from a new Twitter account, which linked to a YouTube account with videos of her in the videos explaining, telling a story about going to attend the very, very well-known court case between Boris Berezovsky and Roman Abramovich, a contract law case which she went and attended day by day as part of research as a case study for the English legal system. What happened after that, and what continues to this day, she says, has been absolutely terrifying for her and for her family. It's had huge consequences for her. It's a story of mind control, of directed energy weapons, of harassment, of overt surveillance. It's extraordinary. I'm delighted to welcome to the programme, all the way from Switzerland, Dr Katherine Horton. Katherine, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hello, Richie. Thank you so much for allowing me to come on your show. It's such short notice as well, because as you said, I've just started putting up information about myself out online, and you were in fact the very first journalist who was willing to actually lend an ear and listen to my story. So thank you very much.
No, I'm delighted. Now, I know you've been in touch with a number of newspapers to try and get some interest in the story, and we'll talk about that as well. Can I ask you to sit as close as you can, Katherine, to the computer, to the microphone there, because you are a little faint there.
Okay, is this better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, a little bit better. A little bit closer would be ideal, but it's a bit better than it was.
Okay, so can your audience hear me?
Yeah, we can. It's better now, Katherine. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's better. Thanks. Right. So, you go to tell us about the court case between Boris Berezovsky and Abramovich, Roman Abramovich, of course, the oligarch, and why you were interested in that, and tell us what happened after that.
So I should, before I launch into the story, I should also prepare people for it emotionally, I think, before I start. It's quite heavy going. And I think once I get started, I've made the experience that if you're not actually a clinical psychopath at some point, you might start feeling physically sick. Just listening to it. And I just would like to say that I don't want to leave people feeling sick so close to bedtime. So what I would like to do is explain my story and then also say what I've learned out of all this. And finally also ask perhaps your audience for help. And I'm hoping that if they feel sick listening to these horrific crimes, maybe after a while they'll feel angry, and then hopefully that will actually kick them into action to help me. Because the truth is, what has happened to me is not just unique to me. I discovered that there are in fact thousands and thousands of people across Europe in my situation, and I never knew anything about them. And in a sense, I'm almost grateful that this happened to me, because I stopped being ignorant, and now I can actually contribute my voice to trying to help them. But so here we go. What happened? And if you just summarized it very well. So I'm originally a particle physicist, but I became very interested in complex systems, and especially complex human systems. And I truly believe that the greatest advances we can make in science or human inquiry don't actually lie in science anymore, but actually in the way we organize ourselves and work together with others. And so what I mean by that is I maybe you remember in the year 2000, of course you remember the year 2008, that was the beginning of my fellowship actually, but we had this horrific financial crisis. And that was a wake-up call for me, because I essentially watched how people's lives were wrecked and people lost their home and their livelihood. So I thought, this can't be right. Surely we could do things better in finance and in many other ways in politics and even in law. So I began to think about that, and I thought I want to study human systems and how to make them better. And I thought my first case study shall be the English legal system, which is famous around the world, but it's also known for being very expensive. And so I thought, okay, I'll find a way to analyze the system and perhaps even find a way to make it better, cheaper, more efficient. I mean, this was essentially my starting point. And at the time when I had this idea, I looked in the papers, and there was this big famous case with the two Russians battling each other in the courts. And I thought, oh, that's perfect, because the court case goes over several weeks. I mean, the actual topic itself was hugely interesting. It was in the press every day. And I thought, fantastic, I'll go there. It also had some big gun lawyers, and it was just a huge spectacle. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go there and I'm going to study the English legal system. And I should say, I didn't know the first thing about the Russians, nor about Russia. So I actually went for the English legal system. And I think I was the only person present, ironically, who didn't know anything about the Russians. I mean, it was interesting to hear about those details, but actually I was much more interested in the way the court was conducting itself. So this is how it started. So I went to attend this court case.
Every day now? You were there every day, right?
That's right.
And you were the only person there every day, because they're not the most interesting of court cases, these. So you're there every day, and I suppose other journalists are probably popping in and out, but you're there every single day.
That's right. And
Right.
I had to be there every day because I think, unlike everybody else who came for the, the spectacular tidbits and the jet setting and this millionaire, billionaire lifestyle, I actually came for the legal arguments, as silly as that sounds. And I
You nerd.
Yes, I nerd, but I also I discovered that if I missed a day, or even if I just missed 15 minutes, I lost the thread,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
I couldn't actually get back into it. So I was there religiously just to be able to, keep on top of everything. And I was really making an effort to understand how the lawyers were working and how the legal case, was being conducted. And I was desperately thinking, how can this be done faster, better, cheaper. So that's why I was there every day. And actually, the court case lasted several weeks. So it's by the time I joined, it was already in full swing. I joined in the beginning of November 2011, and it ran over 6 weeks to the middle of December, and then there were 2 more days in January, and that was it. But then what happened is that I think I must have seen the odd one out, because I think I attracted the attention of British intelligence. And then what happened is that I noticed, at first it was just a gut feeling, and then I noticed that I was actually being followed home. And at first, it was really just a vague feeling, and I thought, no. And then eventually, after I think the first week, there was a man waiting outside my drive every morning. And it was always a different man, but he would be just standing there waiting. And when I came out of my home, walked along the drive, I could see him smiling at me. And then I turned off into the street to walk to the train station in Oxford to travel down to London. And he would set off as soon as I turned into the street. And it would happen the first day, and it would happen again, and it would happen again, and so on. And I think the first day he followed me all the way to the train station. And then the next day, people only followed me halfway there. And as soon as one person turned off, I noticed that someone else would be taking over. So bit by bit, it was almost like a slow pantomime of what was happening. So they very slowly, I managed to map out this sort of organized surveillance system with which I was accompanied all the way to the court and all the way back. And it was absolutely incredible. But in the beginning, I did a couple of little tests, and the typical things one does: suddenly turn off into a shop and see if the person actually is following you. And I realized, yes, they are following
And they
you.
were. So did you confront any of these men?
No, I didn't, because I first of all, initially, I thought, oh, maybe it's the Russian litigants. They had such a huge security operation around them.
Right.
And really, it's not something you want to challenge. And then eventually I thought, they had such local knowledge. I thought, oh, maybe it's British intelligence. But then what am I going to say? I mean, they're just doing their job. So I thought, I'm just going to continue, going every day. But it was very, very odd, and it is actually quite disconcerting. And you always think, but why would they do it so overtly? You know, if they were British intelligence, why would, I mean, they could just, they know who I am. I work for St. John's College. They know, everything about me for the past 10 years. So
that's the thing, Katherine, because I can understand why they'd be very interested in who's paying attention to this particular court case. These two guys, oligarchs, billionaires. But it would have been very easy, very quickly to find out who you were, your academic background, and then say to themselves, well, all right then, yeah, she's just interested for academic reasons. But they didn't. They kept this up, right? This went on and on.
Yes, it went on, and they really, after the end of the court case, it morphed into overt demonstrative harassment and spy theater. And at the time I thought, oh, maybe they're still unsure. You know, if you're not sure what you're looking for, and you just think, oh, this person is strange and there could be something, you just keep going and you keep going. And if there's nothing, because this person really is just an academic, then you just keep going forever, you know.
Were you nervous?
Well, in the beginning, it was extremely disconcerting, extremely. But then again, after a while, it was also just such a pantomime. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, you know. And then I have to say, after a while, it looked pretty much, well, it looked very Monty Python and less, KGB and that whole.
Yeah.
I mean,
now on that point, some of our listeners might be saying, well, if it was a pantomime and Katherine was bemused by it, why didn't she confront one of these guys and say, look, guys, what is going on? Who are you people? Why are you bothering with me?
Well, because it's actually very difficult, because now I'm also telling the entire story in hindsight. So
of course.
For 5 years. And in the beginning, you never know, oh, is this just coincidence? And you're essentially waiting to see what this pans out to be, in a sense, you know? And also the way it's done is such that sometimes these people are standing across the street, so the way it was done with me is that I was systematically conditioned to respond to trench coats and dark hats, literally, as you would expect in a spy movie. And then these men would put on spectacles, behave oddly, but not necessarily right next to me, maybe across the street, or they would be waiting close to my drive and then walk off when I came home. So it was done in a way that they made sure I noticed them, but they were not necessarily right in my face. And just
it wasn't aggressive. They just wanted you to notice them. Now, at any time did it occur to you? I mean, if I was you, Katherine, I would have been saying, Jesus, Katherine, you've worked at DESI in Hamburg. You've worked at CERN in Geneva. I wonder, is it anybody connected to those projects who just want to keep an eye on me?
Yes, I don't think so, because despite all the things that people say about, CERN and all these places, the reality is a lot more boring. I mean, I should say also that CERN is a huge sprawling site, so you never know, is any of your colleagues involved in something else? That's true. But as far as the big experiment is concerned, I have worked on the Atlas experiment, and I have to say the reality is never quite what they, what people who are maybe interested in this stuff but are not particle physicists make it up to be, So for example, what I always like to say is it's true, we have created a black hole at CERN. It's not just a conspiracy, we have created a black hole.
Money.
But it's in the pension fund, It is going to swallow us up, but it's actually a financial black hole. That
being said now, right, that's a brilliant way of saying it. Yes, they have. They've squandered maybe billions and billions of pounds, but at the same time, people like me, and we could talk about this another day, I worry about them, doing what they're doing there, and them maybe not knowing what the consequences might be, but that's for another day. Just want to remind our listeners, by the way, go to stop007.org, stop007.org. That's the new website Katherine has put up there, where she details in great detail what has happened to her over the last few years. And if you're just joining the programme, this is absolutely fascinating stuff. We're joined tonight by Dr Katherine Horton, PhD, first-class Master of Physics, and a PhD in Particle Physics from Hertford College, University of Oxford. What's been happening to her over the last few years, what Katherine claims, is absolutely terrifying. It really is. Because, Katherine, we're now going to move on in the story where this moved away from being a pantomime this overt surveillance where they wanted you to know that they were there, but they weren't being overly intimidating. This escalated into what became more serious. Do you want to take us through that phase then?
Yes, so that actually started being a lot more worrying, well, I think after 4 months. So, I mean, it sounds incredible to people to think this went on for 4 months, but it's true. You don't really react. You're never really sure how to react, so time just passes by. And then after a couple of months, I flew to Germany, and I joined my husband, who was working there at the time. And he and we traveled to visit my sister, and we agreed to meet my sister in the middle of a big square. And by that time, I had seen so many, dark hats and dark trench coat scenes. I was literally, in retrospect, I know it was conditioning, so I was conditioned to respond to that. And then we agreed to meet my sister in this square by text messages. And as we approached the square, suddenly in front of me, I saw a man in a dark hat, dark trench coat, just standing in the middle of the pavement. And he was at right angles to me. And as I approached, he slowly, unnaturally slowly, I should say, he turned his head towards me, stared at me, then grinned at me, and slowly turned his head back. And when someone does that to you, you instinctively follow the gaze. And when I followed it, I discovered he was staring at my sister. So he had been there ahead of us, waiting for her in the square. And we had only that morning arranged by text message to meet her exactly there. So the only people who could have known she would be there would be people who would have watched her or who would have read our text messages. So that was an instance that was not just creepy, it was horrifying. And it's one of those scenes where you discover your sister, you're just shocked. And by the time you look back, the man's gone.
So this became more than a pantomime right there in Germany. In your mind then, this is a very serious situation. So you spoke to your husband about it in Germany. What did he say, Katherine? Because if it was me, I'd be very nervous for you. I suppose I wouldn't know what to do. I'd want to call the police maybe. What was their reaction to what was going on?
So I should say that it was actually quite some time before I even told my husband, because at the time I thought, oh, this is just going to pass. And even when that scene happened, I thought, am I really sure? Did this really happen? It's just so fleeting, and the entire system is designed to be exactly that, so that you don't really, you can't really grip onto anything. And so in the beginning, I didn't even tell my husband. For example, in that scene, I thought, oh, if I told him, he would think I'm crazy. He would think I'm just being silly. So I didn't even tell him at the time. It really was, I think, only after a year and a half that I even told him. It was only once this harassment had followed us to Germany. And by the time I told my husband, he couldn't really believe it. He couldn't believe that there would be a system quite so organized who would be just harassing me. That's the misunderstanding. People always say, oh, but why would they do it just to you? And then you discover that actually it's not just being done to you, it's being done to many, many people across the country.
It didn't, unfortunately for you, it didn't stop at very creepy intimidation, smiling at you on the street, looking at your sister, knowing your movements. It escalated into more serious, what you call in your videos and on your website, crimes. Talk about when it escalated into, eventually this escalated into assault, didn't it?
That's right, into actual physical assault. Yes, and not just physical assault, into non-stop physical assault. So it's very, very hard to understand. So I can explain how it unfolded, and then maybe afterwards I can explain how, as a systems analyst, I can actually explain that it's not just not surprising, it's what you would expect. So what happened is that we, at the end of 2012, so after about a year of stalking, I moved to Germany. And I should say that what happened whilst I was still in Oxford is that I had a break-in into my home. And nothing was stolen, nothing of value was taken. But I came home one day and I found that someone had just rearranged my cupboard. And again, it's something that you can't really go to the police with. You can't say, officer, someone came in and rearranged my cupboard. Yeah. So I didn't say anything at the time. It was very shocking, but I thought, oh, well, college flats, everybody has the keys and we've got janitors, so someone must have come in and had a joke on something. So, but then I moved to Germany at the end of my fellowship, and then what happened is that these odd scenes started up again. We had crazy stuff like a ginormous bus seat placed next to our car in the middle of a forest. So we would come back from a walk and find a huge bus seat in the mud with a note saying in broken German that I should step on and wipe my feet on it. And really disconcerting, unusual, and very rare scenes. And they would keep happening nonstop. But then after a while, we moved to Munich. And in Munich, this escalated. So again, I had men waiting outside my home almost daily. They would be there if I left the home on my own and not be there if my husband came with me. And after a while, I discovered that they must be surveying the inside of my home because they were there as soon as I reached the bottom of the stairs, in a sense.
Did you think about taking any photographs of these people and showing them to your husband or to the police or anybody?
Yes, I did. So I tried to photograph them. I tried to actually capture them. And the problem was that it was always a different person. And then it's very, so the courts and the police are geared towards recognizing stalking if it's, sexual stalking by one person who was obsessed with you. If I had gone to the police with that, they would have kicked into action straight away, I think. But when it's a group of people, they don't know where to place it because the question is always, why would anybody do such a thing? And but I think what it was at the time, it wasn't just a random group. This was the National Surveillance Network, which I've now realized exists and is actually quite large. But then the stalking wasn't just the only thing. In Munich, these disconcerting scenes also followed me into the waiting room of doctors' surgeries. In the end, doctors themselves would be behaving very oddly. So I had one doctor who spent literally 15 minutes ask me about my past history and go into great detail about my nationality. And
no way.
Yeah, it was, but really disconcerting. And what was especially disconcerting is that he had a huge grin on his face whilst he did that.
Now, did you, listen, don't be insulted by this. This is a natural question. Did you at any stage begin to doubt your own sanity? Did you start to think, I might need a rest here. I might be overworked or stressed. Because why is this going on? Did you ever doubt yourself, Katherine?
Well, in the beginning, I really doubted if this is actually happening. I just thought, oh, this is just coincidence. And for example, if someone stands outside your home, you would think, oh, maybe he's just smoking a cigarette. Maybe this guy just waits for somebody. And oh, maybe that guy, just dropped off his car. So you find different excuses over and over. But eventually it turned into systematic harassment, where they made sure that I noticed. So it would not just be a man standing outside my drive. He would be standing there grinning and then set off when I set off, just like in Oxford.
And these are presumably German intelligence agents or German spooks or whatever, obviously operating with the intelligence agencies of the UK. Now, some of our listeners, again, they'll be wondering, why didn't these guys just make it clear what they wanted from you? Why didn't they, if they wanted to frighten you off, if they thought you were involved in something, whether you were or were not, why did they play these games? Now, I know this is a question that you've asked yourself, I suppose, 1,000 times, but just putting those questions to you. I mean, at some stage you must have felt like screaming, what's going on here? Why are you guys doing this? What is it you want from me, basically?
Exactly. This what on earth is it that you want from me is the question that you ask yourself all the way, and you just never get an answer. And to this day, I didn't get an answer asking that question. Eventually, what I had to do is go back and think as a physicist and think as a systems analyst and think, hang on, what if? I mean, it clearly doesn't make any sense. I was never involved in any criminal activity. I'm not a spy. I never have been. What I'm actually doing is most of the time very academic. And what I was doing in Germany is actually trying to launch a startup, helping people get back into work. So, and everything I did was public. So why would somebody do something like that? And I think I now came to realize that's the wrong question to ask, because you're not dealing with a normal system. You're dealing with a system that has run out of control. And to explain it maybe to you and your listeners, there's an example from Germany where I think what happened is that the job center was so inundated with work they couldn't keep up, and they amassed a ginormous backlog. And eventually people put huge pressure on the people working in the job center, and they had to meet targets. And what these people did just to survive and keep their jobs is they started shredding files. Literally, they just shredded them and claimed that these people never turned up to claim benefits. And then imagine if you're a benefit claimant and you go into this system, which is internally run out of control, and you submit a claim and then they don't get back to you. At first you think it's personal, and you think, why are they doing it to me? You know, what have I done to them that they would do something like that to me? And in the end, this entire scandal was uncovered and so on. But it's the wrong question to ask. It's not personal. It's not personal to me. And I now know that there are thousands of people in my situation.
Now, before we get to that, give us an example of when it got physical. When did it first turn physical, and what happened?
Well, the very first time it turned physical, I didn't even notice. Because what started happening, now in hindsight, I will just label it as such, is essentially I would say weapons testing or even human experimentation. Because the very first thing that was extremely odd is I started having a heart problem. And I started having intense heart pains, and it just continued over weeks. And I'm a very healthy, fit person. And eventually I went to the doctor, had a blood samples taken, and the heart pain disappeared as soon as I went. And it was just gone. And I realized, and in retrospect, I realized that that was actually induced. And the entire goal of it was to actually get hold of a blood sample.
Now, your doctor, she or he, they gave you a clean bill of health. So you went with the heart pain, the palpitations or whatever. They took blood tests and probably did an ECG probably or whatever, and said nothing wrong with your heart, right?
Absolutely.
But he had a blood sample. Now, when did you begin to suspect that? Because you had these problems again, and we talked about these today. These feelings of intense pressure, of pain. At some stage, you start to wonder: am I being attacked by something? Am I being attacked by some weapon that is unseen, that I can't see, or that I don't know anything about? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the very first time I was actually overtly attacked was from a helicopter. And that was the very, very first time I actually came across this new type of weapon. And again, I was so used to harassment and strange scenes by that time that, it just passed me by. Other people, I think, would flip out straight away. And by that time, you're so worn down, you just think, oh, that's just, yet another item of harassment. And what happened is that I was standing on we had a rooftop flat, and I was standing on our terrace, looking up through a glass roof, and I noticed that a helicopter was approaching, and it stopped above me. And I was looking up because it was very odd. It was right above my head. And then suddenly I felt these intense waves pass through my body. But it felt as if I was standing in a swimming pool close to these underwater water jets. Extremely intense pressure waves traveling through my body, coming from the helicopter with pressure downwards. And I was just standing there absolutely amazed. And this lasted for a couple of seconds. And I was calling out for my husband to come out. And by the time he did, this whole thing stopped, and the helicopter just flew off. And that was the very first time I was, I think, overtly, demonstratively irradiated with what I now know to be electromagnetic weapons.
And you knew right then and there that something had gone on, that something had been emitted, some signal or some pulse was emitted from the helicopter, and yes. You knew that there and then. But until that point, you're Oxford-educated PhD and research fellow. As bright as you are, you never heard about directed energy weapons, did you? You didn't know anything about any of that.
No, nothing. And I should also say is that the type of physics that I learned is also not even enough now to understand these new type of weapons. I mean, scalar waves and so on. That seems to be an entire research field in itself. And I have to say, I'd never heard about these, and also I couldn't have imagined that they are quite so powerful. That's the truth. I could have never imagined. And even after the scene with the helicopter, I thought, oh well, I knew it wasn't the the air blades, because there was a glass roof. But even after that, I thought, oh well, yes. I mean, I suppose you can have electromagnetic waves of high intensity, and oh well, that's what they did. And well, I hope I won't have a heart attack. But
you must have mentioned this to your husband. You must have talked to him about this. What did he say?
Well, he couldn't believe it. So he was actually standing, I think, 10 meters away from me, and I shouted to him to come. But what these situations are like. At first, he doesn't know what the fuss is about, and by the time he's out, the helicopter was gone. And when I told him, he couldn't believe that this actually existed. And then he started arguing. I mean, he's a theoretical physicist, and he said, yes, but just think about the amount of energy you would have to put into a wave to move, your tissue and your skin. And I said, but believe me, this is what I felt. And you get into these sort of arguments. But I have to say, even as a high energy physicist, I couldn't have imagined that this is what these things actually feel like and how these things work.
That must have been very difficult for you. If I hadn't met David Icke, and if I hadn't read books by researchers like him and others, I wouldn't know anything about what those who work in the shadows are capable of doing to people. So if my fiancée, Katherine, had said to me the things that you were saying to your husband, the theoretical physicist, I love my fiancée, and I'm sure your husband loves you and loves you dearly, but I would be inclined to want my fiancée to go and seek professional psychiatric help. Again, the old me would have wanted to do that. Did your husband, was he really worried about your well-being, your psychological well-being?
At the time, I think, well, in the beginning, I don't think so. But then after a while, as I kept saying, look, these people are just harassing me. And the really nasty thing is that most of the harassment is actually done when there are no witnesses. So most of the conditioning and sensitization to certain triggers is purposefully done away from the presence of others. And it's exactly as you said. So eventually he said, no, this can't be true. And no, sorry, I think you're just too stressed. You should see someone. And he kept saying that ever more adamantly. And eventually I really had to, film things, and I was trying to film things, and I could puzzle things together. But it was and still is very, very hard. I mean, now what is happening to us, he still has extreme difficulties in actually admitting or even accepting that this is happening. And in those moments when he does, he breaks down.
You're still together, right? You're still together. Well, thank God for that. I just want to do a quick recap, Katherine. I want to remind our listeners, if you're just joining the programme, you've missed quite a lot. Dr Katherine Horton is on the line to us from Switzerland. Now, she achieved a first-class Master of Physics and did her PhD in particle physics at Hertford College at the University of Oxford. She also worked as a junior research fellow at St John's College in Oxford. She's been talking about having visited a court case every day for 6 weeks back in 2011 into early 2012, the Boris Berezovsky-Roman Abramovich contract row. Since then, she began to be stalked effectively by people that she believes are working for intelligence agencies. It began as a kind of a pantomime, as she said, her recognising people regularly standing at the end of her driveway, following her in the streets, following her on the train. This was ramped up. It became a bit more sinister. People smiling at her, wanting her to know that they were there, but not in any way, at that particular time anyway, physically intimidating her. It escalated when she went to Germany. Katherine believes and is convinced that she is being targeted by direct energy weapons there. She has obviously spoken to her friends, family and to her husband about this. And Katherine, if I'm right, you have been saying on your website that you are sure that your family and your friends have been used as target practice by these very weapons. Tell us about that. So they've not just directed these weapons at you, you believe, but also at people very close to you. Are they aware of that? Have they spoken about that?
I don't think they are. And to be honest, I wasn't even aware in the beginning. So I have to say, so for the entire year, I was targeted in Germany. So I had this heart problem and I didn't know what it was. And another time I had a headache and it also disappeared the day I went to have an MRI. And at the time, I didn't know anything about microwave weapons or directed energy weapons. But by that time, I already had enough of the stalking, and I was trying to reach out to lawyers and try to do something about that and have that, brought to an end.
You even, sorry to interrupt you, you even contacted at some stage the GCHQ, and you basically, I think this is brilliant. You got in touch with these agencies and said, leave me alone. Stop doing what it is you're doing. Isn't that right?
That's right. So I did that a bit later. So at first I was just using the classical route and I was trying to get a lawyer. And then what happened, and this is essentially how insidious it is, they targeted my family and even my friends and my best friend's mother every single time I contacted lawyers. So it was very hard to find lawyers. And to this day in Germany, I didn't manage to find a single lawyer who was willing to take up this case. But every time I met a lawyer, I would a week later find out that something had happened to my friend or my friend's mother that day. And it was always extremely unusual things. So what I mean by that... Give us an example.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the examples, and this just shows you how extreme it is. And this is why it's so extreme at first you don't understand. It's only in retrospect that when you start being targeted properly, that you suddenly the picture falls into place. So what happened is that just by the by, my sister would, for example, tell me that one of her bikes got stolen, and then another bike would be stolen, and then the third bike would be stolen, and then my brother's jacket would be stolen. There would be this series of thefts, for example. Then my best friend just told me, my mother developed these weird heart problems, and she just doesn't know what it is. And I think she went to every single cardiologist, but no one could find anything. And she said it was extremely odd because her mother would be just sitting somewhere on a sofa and suddenly her heart started racing uncontrollably. And without her being able to control it or see a reason for that. So,
and you suspected this has got to be to do with what's happening to me.
At the time, I didn't even do that. It was only when they did that to me, and after a lot of harassment and a lot of very overt targeting, that I actually figured this out. And but when I started seriously doubting was when the mother of my best friend, who was in her 70s, was struck by lightning on a clear day in the middle of a major city.
You're shitting me. Hang on a second. The mother of your best friend was struck by lightning?
Almost struck by lightning. So she was scared to death because, and this is, if you're a physicist, you can see
on a clear day, right?
Yeah, on a clear day. And she was crossing the road, and there were these ginormous stones as a barrier placed across the street. And as she was crossing, she was there with a friend, so there was even a witness, and she was crossing the road, and suddenly lightning struck into the stone next to her, which was, roughly knee height. And that between tall buildings on a clear day. Now, that is impossible.
Well, officially, we're supposed to believe that our governments are not able to manipulate the weather, officially, but we know better than that. Not that we know everything, we don't know everything, but we know they can certainly do that. You're aware of that now, right?
Well, what I'm aware of, it's actually much simpler than that. You don't even have to steer the weather. All you need is basically a window on the first floor, and there's something you can Google it. It's called the company's called Applied Energetics, and they produce something that's called laser guided energy, and it's very simple. Essentially, a laser that ionizes a beam line, and then you just produce a discharge of current along this ionized beam path. So where you shot the laser just before, you will then pass this current, and you can essentially very precisely target lightning at anything, including a stone, next to a person.
Yeah.
So if it had been real lightning, it should have hit my best friend's mother, not the stone, because she was higher.
She must have got a terrible fright, right? Anybody would do.
Yeah, and that's essentially it. And I remember that distinctly because she did claim to have these heart problems. And I almost wonder if this was essentially just, again, weapons or, medical testing. They upset people's hearts, and then they see how durable these hearts are. I mean, it's sick.
We spoke today briefly, and I haven't a clue why this has happened and is happening to you, but it doesn't stop us speculating a bit. And hearing people telling me stories like this over the last few years and reading them in books written by credible authors, there's a number of things this might be about. And I know listeners are tweeting a lot of emails. This is huge for our audience. They're very interested in this. Somebody thinks that you've got information is one scenario. Somebody very powerful, or some entity, some body of people or group believes that you're a threat to them because you have information. Maybe you're aware of, maybe you're not aware of it. Sounds like more like you wouldn't be aware of it, and is screwing with you, but in a very, very, very serious way. Another theory, and I've been asked to put this to you, and you might think this is outlandish. It's not a theory, it's more a question. What about your genealogy? What about your ancestral path? You know, is your family tree connected to powerful people at all? That's probably a better way of putting it, isn't it, Catherine? Connected to royal families or powerful people. Don't think I'm being a complete idiot now. It's something worth considering. What is your? I don't want to use the word bloodline, but what is your genealogy, your heritage, your family tree? Where does it go? Does it go to, powerful people, rich people, bankers, money people, royalty maybe?
The truth is, I
don't know.
So I don't think so. So I was born in Transylvania, which these days belongs to Romania, and my parents are Hungarians and Germans. So we essentially fled communist Romania in the mid-'80s, and we became immediately German citizens because my grandparents were German and they spoke German. So we were considered repatriates, not even refugees. And so my grandparents spoke German, but the other part of the family is Hungarian. And the Hungarian side is connected to aristocracy, but we're going back to the 13th century or 14th century. So, but since then they have essentially been, the upheaval in Eastern Europe. So that has nothing really to do with it. I know, for example, that Prince Charles has got family in Transylvania, but I don't think we are related to
Fair
that.
enough.
So
and I don't want to sound flippant or silly. These are just things that we sometimes explore in the program. Right then, here's something. A lot of talk in physics, in astrophysics, in science about time and time not being linear. Now, again, don't think now I'm going down silly roads because this is very serious for you and I want to come back to that. You might be a threat to somebody or some institution. Maybe not now, but maybe in the near future. Or as I said, there might be some information that you have that could be beneficial to Party A but harmful to Party B, and that's what might be going on here. Have you considered any of those possibilities?
Well, actually, yes and no. So not in the way you phrased it, because I think the truth is, if you look at what I actually did, it was very, very simple stuff. I mean, I'm a very altruistic person. I'm always trying to have projects where I'm helping people, but I think this in itself is not enough. I think you have to look at the entire thing differently. You have to think in terms of systems, which at first sounds very complex, but suddenly will make everything crystal clear. So I think my first answer to you would be no. However, I do have my own little, theories, and I have noticed odd things myself, especially statistically unusual things. And one of the statistically unusual things I genuinely find very, very worrying is the fact that in the last 5 or 10 years, quite a lot of mathematical prodigies have died in sometimes very unusual circumstances. Sometimes it looked like a takedown operation and then it looked like they killed themselves or they had strange accidents and things like that. And if you want to talk about powerful people and what might really be a thorn in their side, I think mathematical prodigies are one of them.
Why? What would these mathematical prodigies be working on that might offend intelligence agencies and governments? Why?
Well, if you look at, I think it's not even necessarily one particular project. It's the fact that once you are a math prodigy or any sort of, but math particularly, because then you understand systems and you can very quickly analyze systems. You can essentially a math prodigy, in a sense, has this gift that he or she can, within a second, spot something and make associations that would maybe take a lifetime to someone else. So if you want to keep your population stupid, then prodigies are essentially like an atom bomb, because they would spot something straight away that maybe took you decades to cover up. They would immediately know, or they would spot that something is out of whack, immediately analyze what lies behind it. And as soon as they open their mouth, once the secret is out, that's it. You can never go back. Once you have knowledge, once you have the insight, you can never go back. And you probably know this effect that back at school, when you had to solve a math equation, solving the math equation was very, very hard. But then checking that your result was correct was very easy, because you plug it just back in the equation. And this is essentially it. If you've got a math prodigy, within seconds, he or she can work out what the real story is and say, hang on, guys, listen up. This is what I think is actually happening. And as soon as they've spoken the sentence or the paragraph, suddenly people think, oh my God, he or she is right. And then you can never go back into ignorance.
And cutting edge mathematicians are on, at the moment, they're on, one of the things they're on is the simulation universe theory, right? That the universe is a digital construct. And while some of the tabloid newspapers have talked about this, and they've done so kind of, sometimes in a kind of a humorous way, sometimes in a serious way, this is a big thing. If humanity were to understand that the reality they believe exists and the one they're living in isn't actually real. Again, is this an area that, speaking of mathematicians and prodigies, is that something that they might want to cover up extensively?
Yes, but again, I think people are always after the really unusual. They're after UFOs and aliens. And I say to everybody, actually, I know it sounds boring at first, but you will discover truly wondrous things if you just go after the mundane. Because that's where usually where the dead dogs are buried. And I would say, yes, it's true, math prodigies are, very, very dangerous, but not because they would suddenly, find the key to the universe or solve any of those problems, which I think at their core are very theoretical. No. It's actually much simpler than that. A math prodigy can look at a derivative and immediately spot it's a financial scam. A math prodigy can look at financial things, at structures, at computer programs, spot backdoors, or even create them for you. They are,
Yeah, but that being said now, and I don't want to waste time arguing with you on this. That being said, Katherine, you don't have to be a maths prodigy to realise the inherent flaws in the global financial system.
Absolutely.
Because it's a complete and utter illusion. Money is an illusion. It's invented out of thin air by central banks. We all know that. So you don't need a maths prodigy to point that out. But I know where you're going with this. And I'm absolutely fascinated by it. First of all, I'm going to say this. We're going to extend the programme. So long as Katherine is okay by that, we're going to extend it by 10 or 15 minutes because you've more to say and I don't want to cut you off. And the beauty of having your own radio station, Katherine, is you can do whatever you want. So we can stay on till 15:15 the next hour, 20 past if need be. I just want to, if you're okay to do that, we'll do that. Right.
I'll endeavour to make it worth your listeners' while.
Well, it's certainly worth their while. Have no doubt about that. It's been worth their while so far. We are joined today by Katherine Horton, Dr. Katherine Horton. As I mentioned, I'm going to mention again, not because we bow down at the feet of academia, but because it's important, because she is a system woman, a system trained woman. First class Master of Physics and PhD in Particle Physics from Hertford College, University of Oxford, former research fellow at St. John's College. Story's extraordinary. Having worked at DESY in Hamburg, the Large Hadron Collider in CERN, she was attending the court case, the dispute between Boris Berezovsky and Roman Abramovich. She went there day after day after day for 6 weeks. It was a case study. She was looking into the physics of the complexes of human systems. That took her to this case to observe the English legal system. She was there day in, day out. After that, nightmare began to be followed around by all manner of men in their 60s and 70s who made it known to her that they were following her around, stalking her everywhere, outside the house. It became sinister, grinning at her in sinister ways. When she went to Germany, it got worse. She believes that she was targeted by direct energy weapons, which have had a profound effect on her health, have affected the health of her friends and family as well. We talked about her husband, who's a theoretical physicist. He's still not on board with what Katherine is saying. He still doesn't quite believe it, which obviously has been a source of frustration and I would imagine worry and concern to Katherine. We've been talking about what might be going on. We've never heard from anybody like Katherine from this level of academia. We've never heard from anybody like this who believes that they've been targeted like this. The non-stop harassment and the crimes committed against her. She's contacted these GCHQ intelligence agencies to say, stop doing what you're doing to me and my family, or at the very least explain to me what's going on. She's got nowhere. She's contacted tabloid newspapers here in Germany. And Katherine, this is if there was nothing in this, an Oxford-educated PhD, the tabloids would be all over the story just to discredit you and say, this woman is crazy. But they haven't even done that. You can't even get a journalist to come and sit down with you and listen to what you have to say. Hence, you're here. You're tweeting us. You tweeted David Icke today. You tweeted me to say, this is what's happening. I want to tell this story. Can I read you something before we move on? It's 5 to the top of the hour. We're staying on, folks. Because this is huge. On the Prince Charles thing and on Transylvania, some of our listeners are saying, don't think that's insignificant. Charles, the Queen and the royal family are directly related to Vlad the Impaler, as we know. The most famous, one of, if not the most famous Satanists, and we believe reptilian hybrid bloodlines out of Romania. Of course, he's the basis for the character of Dracula. That's, a lot of people saying don't discount that. Others are saying mathematics are very dangerous to the system because of the digital level of the illusion. We just touched on that as well. Question from a number of listeners. I don't want to depress you now, but I'll put this to you anyway. You must know that saying what you're saying and talking to people like me is not going to be helpful to your career. You know that, right?
I actually don't think so, because it depends on, first of all, what you want your career to be. I mean, do you want your career to be in a very corrupt system that's preying on people? I don't want to do that. I want to reach out to genuine people, and in fact, I want to reach out to those people who've got genuine problems. And I actually think that I was so grateful when you replied, and I was actually ecstatic, because I've always listened to your show, and essentially this is how I heard about, for example, Andrea Davison, with whom I've since gotten in touch. And I always found that you interviewed the interesting people, the genuine people, the people who brought me further when I was trying to understand complex systems. Because I've listened to your show for a very, very long time, trying to puzzle together what's actually happening in the world. And everything that I know tells me I have to go this way. I have to go to the people who actually have seen all this, who understand it, because we have to start our work here. Everything else is an illusion. The problems that they say are real problems are kind of problems, but not the biggest ones, and not even problems in a way they present them to be, if you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean, yeah.
And so I genuinely think, and by the way, I mean, I have always done my own thing. I've always gone after the research I thought was genuinely helping people, not what academia does, because there's also a lot of problems in academia, and the funding doesn't always go to the best projects, as probably everybody can imagine.
Do you know what you've just said there will be music to the ears of researchers like David Icke, researchers like many of the men and women who come on this program, because they often say that one of the greatest sources of their frustration is that clever men and women, whether they work in academia or not, often won't go down the roads that the evidence is taking them for fear of ridicule, for fear of isolation, I suppose, and for fear of damage to their career. You know, a lot of abuse has been suffered by people who have left lucrative careers, David being the obvious one, because the system didn't make any sense to him. And while we, and don't take this the wrong way now, because I'm absolutely thrilled you're on this program. I think you're amazing. I'm delighted you're on. While guys like him and others, they don't need the validation of academia, they're also very smart and they understand how important it is. Because you know, Katherine, the average man and woman looks at Richie Allen, idiot. Presenter who talks a lot of crap, he's an idiot. They look at you and they go, PhD, Oxford University, worked in big scientific projects, we believe her. So you saying these things and explaining what happened to you in the way you have done, that is, you know, and I believe you believe it. And I know it's happened to other people. You probably aren't aware of the enormous good it does when somebody with your background breaks water, comes up for air and says, right, this is what's happening. Do you get that?
Well, you know, I would like to say two things. When you said, oh, people say, oh, Richie Allen, just an idiot, I think you misunderstand. I think that's probably because a lot of your programs are on YouTube. I have to say, I have a completely different impression. So all the people who are really interesting, really after going after the, you know, the right stuff, the highly interesting stuff, the, you know, the best performing intellectuals, they are in this area. And not just that, I think you have a huge audience. You have to remember that your viewers count on YouTube is not the truth, okay? So there are ways to estimate someone's genuine viewer count by cross-checking it from other sources and having a statistical argument. And I would say that most people's viewerships are a factor of 10, if not 100 out. So I think you might be surprised how large your viewership or audience actually is. And I genuinely mean that. I mean, I have talked to other journalists who went solo and just had interviews on YouTube. For example, in the US, Greg Hunter is somebody. He does USA Watchdog. And I once, you know, went through this calculation, and I think he's out by a factor of 10 or 100 at least. And it's really, you know, then you suddenly realize, hang on a second, my circulation numbers might be that of The Guardian, you know, or, you know, more. And that's the truth. That's, I think, how reality really looks like, you know, because you're falling into the same trap. You think that you would need some sort of external recognition from someone in a suit to tell you how great you are. And only then would you stop feeling that people think you're an idiot.
Yeah.
That's how you have to view it. You have to think, hang on, how many people come up to me for help? You know, they respect me. And I came up to you for help. I tweeted at you for a reason, because I trust you, you know, and that's the truth. And you would have never, had we met in the street, you would have never thought, oh, Dr. Katherine Horton would be absolutely honored to come on my show, or, oh, she is actually really keen and she thinks if she gets rejected by Richie Allen, you know, that's the end of days. So I think that's what we all have to learn, everybody, that reality doesn't look the way we think it does. And sometimes in a bad way, but I think most of the time in a good way. I think the real truth is that since 2008, so many people had their livelihoods obliterated. Do we keep those people in mind? You know, the thousands of people who lost their home? I think they've fallen out of the matrix. I don't think that they will believe anything that's written in the mainstream papers, you know, because they suffered so hard. And do we keep in mind all those thousands of disabled people who basically, you know, faced destitution and despair when the benefits got cut and were humiliated? Do you think they give a damn what's in the mainstream media? I think so many thousands and millions of people have been lied to badly. They have been burned so badly. They learned to think for themselves. And I think they too, you know, you think, Richie, you're the silent minority, no one listens to you. The truth is there's another silent minority or even majority that doesn't have a radio show, you know, but they're listening to you. And I think one of the things that I have learned, I mean, the last 5 years have been very hard. I've been essentially put through 5 years of Stasi stalking that would break down the average person. And I have now been physically assaulted for a year, not just hourly, sometimes every 3 seconds.
And today, I mean, I was going to come to this. And today as well, I mean, I've got to put the we've already tweeted. I'm going to retweet the website and the YouTube channel so that people can see. Later on, you'll be able to watch Katherine's videos yourself. Even today, you've been physically very unwell because of this today, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I guess I should, I haven't even talked about the details of these microwave weapons, and that's essentially it, right? I mean, I have, in a nutshell, what has happened is that after all the stalking and sabotage and the helicopter irradiation, I thought that was bad. But what happened is that we came back after Christmas when we visited my family, and we returned to our home. And there was this second overt, what I call Stasi-style break-in into our home. And, you know, nothing of value was taken, but 2 diaries disappeared, and there was a piece of jewelry on our windowsill that couldn't have been from me. So again, I knew someone had been here. And then what happened is that inside my home, I said to my husband, look, I had enough of this nonsense. Tomorrow I'm going to report that to the police, and I don't care what the police thinks. And shortly after we went to bed, and then for the very first time, I was overtly attacked with microwave weapons. And for those people who don't know what microwave weapons are and cannot imagine what it feels like, it's just a brief description. It's absolutely terrifying. I was lying in bed, and suddenly the sole of my foot was burning. And suddenly this ache and this burning feeling traveled up my leg to my knee, where it turned into intense joint pain. And when something like that happens, one instinctively just places a hand on the knee. And as soon as I did that, the pain transferred from my knee into the joints and knuckles of my hand. And that was so unusual. You know, you instinctively put on your other hand, and then suddenly the same thing happened. So the pain transferred onto, you know, into the fingers and the knuckles of my left hand. And I thought, this can't be right. So I started moving my hands around, and I realized I was essentially reaching into, well, you can call it the pain beam. I was reaching into an area of space where my hands would be just aching. And then you wave your hands around, and you can make out a beam being shot into your home. And all I could do was make out that it seemed to be coming from east before it was switched off. But in that episode, my foot and also the hand that I waved around in the beam was burned so badly that it was aching for several days without actually leaving any traces on the upper layers of the skin. So, I mean, I knew that must have been a beam, you know. I mean, it can't be a neurological illusion or a neurological problem, because it would have had to jump from the area in charge of my right leg to that in charge of my right hand, and then jump across brain hemispheres to that in charge of my left hand, you know. So it couldn't have been something inside my head. And as a physicist, I thought, no, this must be a beam. But then, ever since that day, I have been assaulted in the beginning daily, then hourly, and now I'm being fired at all out with these weapons. And they are terrifying. They really are, and they are deadly. You know, they call them non-lethal weapons in the armaments industry. That's a lie. That's basically a sales pitch. They are the deadliest weapons we've ever produced. And this is what happened. So this is my life since January has been basically like, well, I don't know. I mean, essentially like an animal being persecuted.
And that's no life, Katherine. How do you cope with that? Because I'm reasonably strong mentally, but I think I would collapse under the horror of that. The horror that somebody is doing that to you, deliberately doing that to you to wreck your quality of life. I would collapse under it. How are you coping with that?
Well, it's very, very hard. I think what happens is that actually this is one of the things that I have learned. It's in a sense a blessing at first, and then it becomes a curse. When you're put through extreme psychological stress, your brain turns on an emergency program. It kind of slows you down, and you kind of you freeze in a sense. You know, I mean, people say it's a flight or fight response. That's not correct. It's a freeze. Flight or fight response. So your first reaction is freeze, and you kind of when it keeps being done to you, it turns into mental paralysis. So you slow down and you cope by not taking it all in at once, in a sense. And the reason why I think this is really important for your listeners to hear is because I believe what is happening to me psychologically in these circumstances also happens to a lot of people who basically are on benefits and have to fight for their livelihood, because you get so many negative impulses, so many rejections, that you're under as much stress as I am, and then an effect from psychology kicks in, which is called learned helplessness. You become helpless because you freeze, you become paralyzed, and it helps you to cope in the moment, but after a while it doesn't help you to get out. So if I'm trying to make it worthwhile for your listeners, talking about all this horrific stuff at such a late hour.
No, it's very worthwhile. Don't worry about that. And the juxtaposition of how they, attack the minds of people whom need help financially by the way they are treated, juxtaposing that with what's happening to you. It's a brilliant comparison.
I think it's also very apt, because that's precisely what is happening, because if you've been downtrodden and you get all these negative impulses. I mean, I used to teach students in mathematics when I was a school student myself, and people have such bad experiences with maths because the teachers are very bad. In the end, they start doubting themselves, and they would come to me, and I would have students who would be close to tears, and so I know what that feels like, and I also know how to work through that and turn it around. But I had to really learn that myself now. And one way I found, and maybe that's also useful to your listeners, should you be in such a horrific situation that you're in financial distress or some other sort of distress, or maybe because we've now heard in the news about child sex abuse, that's horrific, you are traumatized. I found that it helps to step out of learned helplessness if you try to help somebody else on a different topic, So if you are suffering from the consequences of child sex abuse, why not help somebody who is disabled? Because you can help them so easily, and you will not have an issue with that. And similarly, by doing that, they will teach you stuff that will help you, So when you have a problem, step sideways. And in a sense, this is also what I'm trying to do now. What I'm now trying to do is essentially make these people stop. With they, I mean the intelligence agencies. I believe I have uncovered essentially large-scale weapons testing. And what these people are doing is, I believe, and I have got measurements and reason to believe that it is the case, I believe the short explanation for what I have experienced is that it had nothing to do with me that I ended up on the list. I ended up because of people's carelessness. And once you're on a surveillance list, there's no mechanism to be taken off. It's like the no-fly list in the US. But once you're on a list, this system will essentially do whatever it likes with you. And it will do whatever is next on their agenda. And I think right now, these electromagnetic weapons are the hottest thing in the arms industry. I found a leaked report where people in another country said, we want to have more data on these non-lethal weapons, but we only have them on human cadavers. So we want to have them on live samples, as they said, and especially on fetuses. Now, that's really worrying. Aren't you announcing that you're looking for data on pregnant women?
Yeah.
And then I found evidence for that to be exactly the case, So to cut a long story short, I started being shot at with these microwave weapons. I didn't know why. And at first I thought it's because I went to the police, but now I realize that's just a pretext. That's just a cover-up. It was planned that they would be testing weapons on me a long time ago, and they were testing it on thousands of other people as well. And it doesn't matter what we do. This program is just run. I'm basically shot at with doses that are preset by a computer program. The computer program does the targeting. And to understand all this, you just need to know two things. Number one, microwaves pass through brick and concrete. They don't get completely absorbed. They pass through. So a normal house wall would maybe absorb half the microwave energy. So this means it's shooting a microwave beam at a house. It would go through like a laser pointer would go through milky glass. Okay, so with that, it's pretty clear you can be shot at in your own home. And these beams can be made as narrow as maybe a pound coin. That's number one. But then you think, how can they see me inside? Well, for that, you just have to know that these days there's modern radar. They radiate your home. Listen, essentially, imagine you're listening in for the echo and you map out a home. And I have found advertising material from the Lawrence Livermore laboratory in the US where they advertise radar you can put on the back of a pickup truck. and make a floor plan of a multi-story building from that. Right? Now, what
Right,
does that
right,
mean?
yeah.
Yeah. So, but what they do not say in that advertising material, and it's the computer graphics are very clean. What they do not say is that you will also see the humans inside on every floor, whatever they do. If they lie in bed, if they are sitting at a desk, okay? And now combine the two. Can you hook the two things up to computer software and maybe shoot a microwave beam the size of a pound coin at the person inside that building? Of course you can. And you can have a bit of pattern recognition. You know how you have your mobile phone, and as soon as you turn on the camera, it automatically puts little moving squares around the faces. Well, the pattern recognition software is now so cheap. This software comes for free with your phone. And the military version is much more sophisticated. And imagine, once you have this technology, you can shoot at anybody inside their home. And it's terrifying, because they do. They test these weapons on us. And why would they want to test them under these conditions? Well, simple. It's because they can.
Because they can, and at the same time, we are bombarded by advertisements in between programs on television about smart meters are coming to your home really soon. And it's a great idea, so they say, because no more estimated bills will give you a real bill, but you're being bombarded then from within the home by these same electromagnetic pulses, right?
Yeah, so you can be mapped out from those little sensors too. And I think Dr. Barry Trower talks about the fact that the radiation in itself is everything but healthy. And these electromagnetic weapons, I mean, a better name for them is essentially cancer weapon, because that's their default mode. The radiation punches through your body and in the seething tumors.
Do you believe, Catherine, as we believe, that you can connect the dots and you can bring this into a planned mass global culling or global depopulation agenda?
Absolutely, yes. And I have copious amounts of evidence that is precisely what is happening. But, okay, now comes the but, and this is where I don't want people to go to bed terrified. If you use systems analysis, you can also tell, and hopefully someone one day, who knows somebody gets through to these megalomaniac idiots and puts this simple point across to them. If you use systems analysis, you can prove that doing that will be deadly, and most deadly for the people at the top. Okay? Why? It's because the people at the top own essentially most of the big corporations in the world. Okay? And there's data on that, so that's not just a theory. So Swiss mathematicians have actually shown that to be the case. Now, if you have these huge global companies, they've got huge global supply chains and very complex ones, and sometimes your supply chain consists of tens of thousands of companies all over the world. If you now start culling, and I hate this word, you start murdering people, you, in large numbers, you will be murdering the productive, essentially the people doing the actual real work for your supply chain. But you will be murdering them in a way that you can't tell who's really useful and who isn't. You essentially shoot yourself in the foot. And no one thinks about it this way, but I'll have a very simple example. I think one young scientist or journalist did this test. He tried to build his own toaster, and he discovered that a toaster has about several thousand parts, separate parts, and they have different materials, and you need such expertise to make those materials. So he discovered that every item that we have is actually reliant on a highly specialized supply chain and highly specialized expertise of several thousand people. Now, if these globalists or the rulers of the world want to randomly kill us off and reduce us by 2/3, what I will say to them is, then every single item that they own, including their jets, will stop working within a year, because they will have killed off those experts who know this detailed information, how to mix metals together, for example, to make airplanes, not break apart in midair. And all these things they don't think about, because they're such top-down people. The truth is, we need everybody. And we can only live with our complex systems these days if we keep everybody alive and we keep everybody healthy. So that's the answer. Yes, it's true, they want to cull us, but if they do, they will die first.
They will go before we do.
Yeah.
Quick mention again of where people can find out more. It's stop007.org. The astonishing, really, Dr. Katherine Horton, St. John's College, Oxford Research Fellow, PhD in physics, worked at CERN, worked at DESY, has had enormous, I think, she doesn't agree, but I think enormous guts. It takes guts to, in the face of the ridicule, in the face of, we spoke about, family and relationships and your husband, enormous courage to talk about these things. I want you to tell people what you want them to do, and we'll get to that in a second before we wrap up. But before that, in the videos, because I've tweeted your YouTube channels, I want people to subscribe to Katherine on YouTube. Also follow her Twitter. I'll tweet her Twitter. Follow her on Twitter. She's only launched the Twitter page. I became your first follower today. But we'll tweet where people can find you on Twitter. You're using, when things get difficult for you in terms of when these weapons are being used and you're not well, it seems that you're using some sort of Faraday cage. Is that right, or something like it?
Well, I tried. I actually bought an actual proper professional Faraday cage from actually an arms manufacturer who's manufacturing the very weapons with which I'm being attacked. So you can see how he's making his own market. But actually the truth is, with the Faraday cages, I found that they can just crank up the power, and they seem to be using either wave shapes or frequencies that pass through. So, but what I have now found is, there are thousands of victims, unfortunately, as I've discovered. So what victims discovered is, if you cut up the Faraday cage and you stick on glue on aluminium and you turn on a fan, you can essentially trick the AI system that is targeting you. So imagine there are victims who have to essentially trick military software so that they can sleep at night. That's the reality.
That's the reality people are faced with. And it's the reality you're faced with at the moment. And believe me when I say my heart is broken for you. And for anybody else who's going through that. I don't say that as just a line. I really do. This stuff stays with me. I don't sleep nights thinking about people, and I realise how blessed I am that I've never had to experience any of this. It kills me that they can do this to people and get away with it. And that's why I want to ask you in the last few minutes that we have left, because what's really important here is you've identified a very serious problem. You've identified what people are doing, what their agenda is. You've also identified how to beat them, I suppose, to a certain extent. But what do you want anybody who listens to this today, what do you want them to do with the information?
So what I would like is, actually, if you go to stop007.org, on the right there's a link on help us and how to help us, and there are many things that people can do to help not just me but also other victims that make a huge difference and are essentially for free, because these people can get away with it because, me included, a year ago I was ignorant about the existence of these weapons, how they worked, that so many victims exist. And if you sometimes as little as retweeting is worth gold, because you allow victims to get through to somebody who actually can help them, sometimes professionally with inside information. So if people took the time to go to stop007.org and clicked on the first link on the top on the right hand side, which is help us, there's an entire list of things how they could help me. I would be so grateful for those people who are on Twitter if you could please follow me and literally just keep an eye on my well-being, because I think a lot of the victims who go through this are terrified. I got death threats. I keep getting death threats. I have got physical assaults that feel like they're about to kill me. And it helps people already if you know that they're followers, and should something really bad happen, you can tweet it to them.
Yeah.
And I, in this list that I've written on the Help Us page, there's also things that you can do to kick into action should the attacks get worse, pass on information and things like that. But the most important thing would be, please have a look at my website. I've just done it at the beginning of the week, so it's not perfect, but there's already a lot of information out there. We'll tidy it up, and please follow me on Twitter, because then I can communicate and I can explain so much more. I can put up shorter videos and help people, because what you have to realize is that there are thousands of people in my situation. There really are, and I think this problem could be solved with a couple of phone calls from people high up, And the reality is we're now going towards Christmas, and imagine there are people this Christmas who will be tortured in their own home, being shot at with powerful microwave beams. Imagine the power of your microwave focused into a beam and shot into a person. And that's the reality. And if I could, I would solve it before Christmas. So I am going to swing into action the next 3 weeks, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to just get this forward. And if you could just take, in these 3 weeks, maybe keep your eye on me, please, that would help me a lot.
That's what really distressed me today, more than anything, was the sense of isolation that you must be feeling, because I saw this hastily thrown together Twitter account, and it's fine, and the website is it's fine, it looks well, and it's very user friendly, and the videos, and I watched the videos, and I got this sense of you feeling that you're really on your own there.
And I am, and I'm terrified. I'm fearing for my life. And just to explain to people what this is, imagine you're at your desk. I had to build like what I call military grade shielding. So I've got aluminium shielding around my desk just to be able to sit stationary for a couple of hours, because these people by now shoot powerful beams into my skull, drill it into my lungs every couple of seconds. And I put up a video where you can see I'm being shot at every minute by a computer program that steers it such that it's exactly on the same second, of the minute. And just last night I was hit in the kidney so badly that I feel damaged the entire day, because what they're doing is they're testing essentially how hard they can hit you until they damage your organs. And they have access to your medical record. They just wait until you go to the doctor, and then they have the data, job done, and you're left with a damaged kidney, and that's the reality. I'm terrified every single day. I'm scared to go to bed, because then I'm stationary and I don't know what they're going to do to me.
You have a lot of people now who will stay in touch with you. You have a direct line to our program, and to me, not that I can do anything for you, of course I can't, but one of the things that the mainstream media does is use people for stories that are interesting to to cultivate an audience, and then the mainstream media couldn't give a damn about those people. Of course, we don't operate like that. We're in touch with everybody who's ever come on the program. What I will tell you, I'm pretty sure that when the people at davidicke.com share the YouTube video of our conversation tomorrow, I'm pretty sure if I ask them that they'll put links to your Twitter and your website underneath it, that they'll put a little a little add-on there to say this is Katherine was on the Richie Allen show on davidicke.com, and here are the details. So we'll do that, and we'll encourage people to get in touch with you, and as you said, to keep an eye on you. But I'm sure you're going to be hearing from people, even though you already do. I know you're in touch with people who experience this, but I'm sure you'll hear from more people now that that we've spoken. All that's left for me to say is thanks for having the courage to do it, and we very much appreciate anybody coming from a system background, and I know you won't take that as an insult. You know that Oxford University and academia doesn't get any more establishment than that. What it helps us do is to bring in an audience to programs like this that are not people who have already heard this information, but people who ordinarily might think that this is conspiracy crackpot stuff. But when they hear somebody like you, they have a moment of pause. And that's why, we're indebted to you for having the courage to do it. But you've made friends here, and not in the sycophantic crap way, but in the real way. We'll look out for you. And, anything you ever need from us, if we can give it to you, we'll give it you,
Thank you, Richie, and thank you to your audience as well for having given me all this time. And we've now taken an entire half an hour, and I'm so grateful. Thank you very much. I mean, in this time, and one thing I wanted to say is every single time I hear the word conspiracy theory, I always say, no, it's a business plan. If instead of conspiracy theory, ask yourself, is it a viable business plan? Because if it is, someone somewhere will have done it.
There's no doubt about it.
Thank you so very much. And I'm extremely grateful that you gave me the opportunity to actually share this story. And as I said, I'll work all out to actually solve this problem, not just for myself, but also for the thousands of others who suffer from this.
Well, don't be grateful to us. The honour and the pleasure is ours. Katherine, anytime you need anybody here, we're connected on Skype, and you have my mobile phone number. Just send us a text. Ordinarily, I would have been in touch with you tomorrow, but I'm away for most of the day tomorrow. But over the course of the next 2 days and the weekend, I'll be there to follow up on this with you, to keep in touch with you. We'll always be there for you. And once again, thanks. And folks, do go to stop007.org, stop007.org. And I've tweeted Katherine's Twitter handle, so you can follow her on Twitter. Do go and follow her on Twitter now and follow this story. Katherine, thanks again. Look after yourself.
Thank you, Richie. And have a good night, everybody.
And you too. An extraordinary woman there, really. Let's be honest about it. There's no other way of describing her. That was Dr Katherine Horton, who is Master of Physics, first-class Master of Physics, PhD in Particle Physics from Hartford College, Oxford University, worked at the electron synchrotron accelerator DESI in Hamburg, and later at the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Geneva. And after becoming interested in complex human systems and going to the Berezovsky-Abramovich contract dispute court case in London for over 6 weeks, that set into motion an incredible, not incredible at all, an extraordinary series of events which have led to her being harassed and stalked by intelligence agencies across Europe and being targeted by direct energy weapons.